One moment changed everything that night. A single hand grabbing a collar. A room full of witnesses. And a billionaire who was about to prove that money never decides who deserves respect. Hey friends, welcome back. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Which country do you call home? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing where this community reaches. Tonight's story is one of the most emotional ones I've shared in a long time. It's about pride, humiliation, and a truth that was buried for years. A truth that finally came out in the middle of a crowded ballroom. Stay with me till the end, because what happens will stay with you long after this video ends. She had learned a long time ago that some people only see the uniform, never the person wearing it. Her name was Amara Bell, 29 years old. And for the past 3 years she had worked as a maid at the Whitfield estate, one of the wealthiest households in New York. She started every morning before sunrise, polishing floors that reflected chandeliers she'd never be invited to stand under as a guest. She folded linens worth more than her monthly rent. She served meals she could never afford to order for herself. And through it all, she did her work with quiet dignity. Because dignity, she believed, was the one thing nobody could take from her, no matter how small they tried to make her feel. Amara wasn't born into hardship. She grew up in a modest but loving home in Georgia, raised by a single mother who cleaned offices at night so Amara could study during the day. Her mother used to tell her, "Baby, we may not have much, but we will never be small. Never let anyone convince you that your worth depends on your job title." Amara carried those words like armor. When her mother passed away 2 years ago, Amara was left with medical bills, a small apartment, and a heart full of grief. She needed steady work, and the Whitfield estate offered good pay, a private room, and stability. She took the job not because it was her dream, but because it was survival. And in survival she found purpose. She worked with excellence, treating every task, no matter how small, as something worth doing well. The man of the house, Daniel Whitfield, was 33 years old, heir to one of the largest real estate empires on the East Coast. Daniel wasn't like the stereotype people expected from old money. He had inherited wealth, yes, but he had also inherited his late father's belief that true character is revealed in how you treat people who can do nothing for you. Daniel noticed things others didn't. He noticed how Amara greeted the gardener by name every morning. He noticed how she stayed late, without complaint, to help the kitchen staff during large events. He noticed her strength, quiet and unshaken, even when others around her acted as though her presence was invisible. Daniel was engaged to Victoria Lane, 31 years old, a woman from a wealthy family herself, known in social circles for her sharp tongue and even sharper ambition. Victoria was beautiful, polished, and calculated. To the outside world, she and Daniel looked like the perfect match. Two powerful families joining together, a wedding that would be talked about for years. But behind closed doors, Daniel had started to notice cracks in the image. Victoria's kindness seemed to exist only when cameras or important guests were present. Around the staff, she was a different person entirely. Cold, dismissive, and at times cruel. Daniel told himself it was stress from wedding planning. He told himself people change once they settle into new roles. He wanted to believe the best in the woman he was about to marry. But deep down, a quiet unease had already begun to grow. Tonight was the night of the Whitfield Foundation Gala, an annual charity event held in the grand ballroom of one of Manhattan's most prestigious hotels. Politicians, celebrities, business leaders, and philanthropists filled the room in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, champagne glasses catching the light of crystal chandeliers overhead. It was the event of the year, and Victoria had spent months orchestrating every detail, determined to make it flawless, determined to make herself the center of it. Amara had been asked to help oversee the catering staff for the evening, ensuring everything ran smoothly behind the scenes. She wasn't supposed to be seen. She wasn't supposed to be noticed. She was simply supposed to make sure 300 of New York's elite had their champagne refilled and their canapés perfectly presented. She had no idea that by the end of the night, she would be the most talked-about person in that entire ballroom. As the orchestra played and laughter echoed off marble floors, nobody could have predicted what was about to unfold near the grand entrance. A moment that would freeze the entire room, expose a hidden truth, and change the course of several lives forever. Because somewhere in the crowd, an old memory was about to resurface. A memory Victoria never wanted anyone to know. And it was about to walk right through those golden doors, wearing a maid's uniform. Nobody in that ballroom expected the night to turn the way it did. The gala was in full swing. String lights and imported white roses lined every table, and waitstaff moved gracefully between guests, refilling glasses with expensive champagne. Victoria stood near the center of the room in a stunning navy gown embroidered with crystals, greeting donors with practiced charm, her laughter light and performative, her eyes constantly scanning to make sure everything appeared perfect. Amara had been asked to personally deliver a tray of hors d'oeuvres to the head table, a task usually reserved for senior staff. She walked carefully, balancing the tray, weaving through the crowd of tuxedos and gowns. As she passed near the grand entrance, she happened to overhear a conversation between two guests, an older woman and her companion, discussing an old scandal from years ago involving a young woman who had allegedly been paid off to disappear from a wealthy family's life after an inheritance dispute. Amara didn't think much of it at first. Rich family gossip was common at these events. But something about the names mentioned made her pause, names connected to Victoria's family. She continued walking, brushing it off as none of her business. That's when it happened. Victoria, mid-conversation with an important donor, turned and saw Amara walking nearby. In that instant, something shifted in Victoria's expression, a flicker of panic, quickly masked by fury. She excused herself abruptly and marched toward Amara with sharp, deliberate steps, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown. "You," Victoria said, her voice low but venomous. "What did you hear?" Amara blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was just delivering." Before she could finish, Victoria's hand shot out and grabbed the collar of Amara's uniform, yanking her forward. The tray in Amara's hands clattered loudly to the floor, shattering glasses and scattering food across the polished marble. Gasps rippled through the nearby crowd as heads turned. "Do you think you can eavesdrop on my guests?" Victoria hissed, her grip tightening. "Do you know who I am? Do you know who you're talking to?" Amara's heart pounded, humiliation burning through her chest as dozens of eyes locked onto the scene. She wanted to explain, to defend herself, but Victoria's grip and the venom in her voice left no room for words. The music seemed to fade into the background as more and more guests turned to witness the confrontation, phones subtly rising to capture the moment. Just as the tension in the room reached its peak, urgent footsteps approached from the entrance. Daniel Whitfield, who had stepped outside briefly to take a call, walked back in just in time to see his fiancée's hand gripping the collar of a woman he deeply respected, a woman who had shown his household more genuine kindness than most people he'd known his entire life. Daniel froze for half a second, processing the scene. Then something in him hardened. "Victoria!" His voice cut through the ballroom, calm but commanding. "Let her go. Now." The crowd fell silent. Victoria turned, still gripping Amara's collar, her expression shifting from fury to something more careful, more calculated, as she realized how many important eyes were now on her. Daniel, she was listening in on private conversations. I said let her go. There was a weight in his voice that made even Victoria hesitate. Slowly, her fingers released the fabric. Amara staggered back slightly, straightening her uniform with trembling hands. Her eyes glassy but her chin lifted, refusing to let the tears fall in front of the crowd. Daniel walked past Victoria without another glance and stood directly in front of Amara. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. His tone completely different now, gentle, sincere. Amara nodded stiffly, though her voice shook. "I'm fine, sir. I apologize for the mess. I'll clean it up right away." "You have nothing to apologize for," Daniel said firmly, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Whispers spread like wildfire through the ballroom. Guests exchanged glances. Phones lowered but curiosity heightened. Victoria stood frozen, humiliation and rage battling behind her eyes, painfully aware that the image she had spent months building was now cracking in front of the very people she had wanted to impress most. But what none of them knew yet, what only Amara had begun to suspect from the conversation she'd overheard, was that this collision between Billionaire, Fiancée, and Maid was about to unravel a secret far bigger than a moment of public embarrassment. Because the young woman mentioned in that scandal from years ago, the one paid to disappear from a wealthy family's life, was about to be revealed as someone standing in that very room. The ballroom hadn't fully returned to its usual hum of chatter when Daniel turned to face the crowd. His jaw tight. His eyes scanning the faces of people who had moments ago been laughing over champagne. "I think we all just witnessed something that has no place at this event or anywhere," Daniel said, his voice steady but firm. "Amara has worked for my family for 3 years. She has shown more integrity in that time than most people show in a lifetime. She deserves an apology." Victoria's face flushed crimson. "Daniel, you're embarrassing me in front of everyone." "You embarrassed yourself," he replied quietly, "the moment you put your hands on someone who works twice as hard as anyone in this room, for a fraction of the respect." Gasps and murmurs spread again, but this time something had shifted. Sympathy was turning toward Amara and toward Daniel, while judgment settled heavily onto Victoria. It was in this charged silence that an elderly woman near the head table rose slowly from her seat. She was Eleanor Grant, a respected philanthropist and old family friend of the Whitfields, known for her sharp memory and even sharper honesty. She walked toward the small crowd with the help of her cane, eyes fixed intently on Amara. "Forgive me, dear," Eleanor said softly, studying Amara's face. "But you look remarkably like someone I used to know. Tell me, what was your mother's name?" Amara, still shaken, answered hesitantly. "Diane. Diane Bell." The color drained from Eleanor's face. She turned sharply toward Victoria, her expression hardening into something between shock and disbelief. "Victoria, is this the Diane Bell your family paid to leave Whitfield County all those years ago? The woman your father claimed made false accusations against your family?" The room went utterly silent. Victoria's confident mask shattered completely. "Eleanor, please, this isn't the time." "No," Eleanor said louder now. "I think this is exactly the time." Daniel turned slowly toward Victoria, his expression darkening with realization. "What is she talking about, Victoria?" Victoria's hands trembled as the weight of exposure crushed the careful image she had built. "It was years ago, Daniel. Before us. It has nothing to do with our relationship." "Then explain it," Daniel said, his voice quiet but unwavering. Eleanor spoke instead, her voice heavy with old sorrow. "Years ago, a young housekeeper named Diane Bell worked for Victoria's family. She discovered something she shouldn't have, evidence that Victoria's father had manipulated financial records to cut out a rightful business partner from a deal worth millions. Diane was going to speak up. Instead, she was accused publicly of theft, fired without cause, and quietly paid a settlement to disappear and stay silent. Her reputation destroyed to protect the family name. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Her mother had never spoken of this. Not once. All she remembered were her mother's tears some nights, and her refusal to ever explain why they had moved away from Whitfield County so suddenly when Amara was a little girl. "My mother lost everything because of your family," Amara said slowly, the pieces falling into place, her voice trembling with a mixture of grief and disbelief. She worked nights cleaning offices for the rest of her life because no one would hire her after that. She died still carrying that shame, a shame that was never hers to carry. Victoria said nothing. For the first time that night, there was no performance left, no charm to hide behind. Just the raw, ugly truth standing exposed in front of hundreds of witnesses. Daniel stepped back from Victoria as though seeing her clearly for the very first time. "You knew," he said quietly. "This whole time you knew who she was, didn't you? That's why you reacted the way you did. You weren't afraid she overheard gossip. You were afraid she'd remember." Victoria's silence was answer enough. The ballroom, once filled with laughter and clinking glasses, now held its breath, witnessing not just a scandal, but the quiet, devastating collapse of a lie years in the making, and the beginning of something none of them could have predicted. The silence in the ballroom felt heavier than any words could have. Daniel stood between two women, one he had promised to marry, and one his family had unknowingly wronged years before he was even old enough to understand the damage his own family's business had caused. His mind raced backward, piecing together fragments of conversations he'd overlooked, moments of unease he'd dismissed, small inconsistencies in Victoria's stories that he'd chosen not to question. "Everyone, please," Daniel finally said, turning to address the stunned crowd. His voice steady despite the storm inside him. Tonight was supposed to be about generosity, about giving back to communities that need it most. Instead, it's revealed something about accountability that I think we all needed to witness. He turned to Amara, whose eyes were now filled with tears she could no longer hold back, not from humiliation, but from years of buried grief finally surfacing. "Amara," Daniel said gently, "I am so sorry. Not just for tonight but for everything your family endured because of mine. That settlement, that silence forced onto your mother. It was wrong. It was cruel. And it should never have happened." Amara wiped her eyes, her voice trembling but resolute. "I don't want your pity, Mr. Whitfield. I want people to know my mother was not a liar. She was a good woman who tried to do the right thing, and it destroyed her life. Then let's make sure the truth is finally heard," Daniel said firmly. He turned to Eleanor. "Eleanor, would you be willing to help uncover the full truth of what happened? Publicly, properly, with documentation?" Eleanor nodded solemnly. "I kept records from back then, dear. I always suspected something wasn't right, but I never had proof strong enough to challenge it alone. If you're willing to help me finish what I started years ago, I believe we can finally clear Diane's name." Victoria, desperate now, reached for Daniel's arm. "Daniel, please, think about what this will do to us, to the wedding, to both our families' reputations." Daniel gently but firmly removed her hand from his arm. "Victoria, you had every chance to tell me the truth. Instead, you chose to protect a lie, and tonight, you put your hands on an innocent woman to keep that lie buried. I can't marry someone who values reputation over basic human decency." Gasps spread once more through the crowd, but this time, quiet nods of understanding followed. Several guests, respected figures in the city, stepped forward to offer support, some admitting they'd always sensed something calculated beneath Victoria's polished exterior. Amara stood in the middle of it all, overwhelmed, torn between the raw pain of old wounds reopening and a strange, unexpected sense of relief. For years, she had carried her mother's unspoken shame as though it were her own inheritance. Tonight, in front of hundreds of strangers, that shame was finally being lifted, piece by piece, replaced with truth. "Amara," Daniel said softly, turning back to her. His voice now free of formality, speaking not as an employer, but as a man deeply moved by what he'd witnessed. "Your mother deserved so much better. And so do you. Whatever it takes, I promise you, we will make this right." For the first time all night, Amara allowed herself to fully break down, not from humiliation, but from years of grief finally finding somewhere safe to land. Strangers around her, guests who moments ago had only seen a maid in uniform, now saw a woman who had endured more strength and dignity in silence than most people could imagine enduring at all. As the ballroom slowly began to process what had unfolded, nobody yet knew just how far Daniel would go in the weeks that followed to restore Amara's family name, and how, in doing so, he would discover something about his own life that he never expected. In the weeks that followed the gala, the story of that night spread far beyond the ballroom walls. Word of what happened reached local news outlets, then national ones, not because of scandal for scandal's sake, but because people were moved by the truth that had unfolded. A truth about a young mother who lost everything trying to do the right thing, and a daughter who carried that burden with quiet grace for years without ever knowing the full story. Daniel, true to his word, worked alongside Eleanor to formally investigate the old financial records. With Eleanor's documentation and additional testimonies from former employees who had stayed silent out of fear years earlier, the truth about the manipulated business deal came fully to light. Diane Bell's name was publicly cleared. A statement was issued, an official correction to years of false accusations, finally restoring the reputation of a woman who was no longer alive to see it happen, but whose daughter stood proudly to witness it on her behalf. Victoria's engagement to Daniel ended quietly in the days following the gala. She stepped back from public life for a while, facing consequences both social and professional as details of the cover-up became known. Daniel didn't seek revenge or public humiliation for her. He simply chose to stop protecting a lie he was once unknowingly a part of. Amara, overwhelmed by the sudden public attention, initially wanted nothing more than to return to her quiet life. But something had shifted in her. For years, she believed her only inheritance from her mother was hardship and quiet suffering. Now, she understood her true inheritance was strength, the kind of strength that survives humiliation, survives loss, and still chooses grace over bitterness. Daniel, deeply moved by Amara's resilience and the growing respect he'd developed for her character throughout the ordeal, offered her more than an apology in the months that followed. He established a scholarship fund in Diane Bell's name, dedicated to supporting young women from working-class families pursuing education and career opportunities in business and finance, the very fields where Diane had once been silenced. Amara, with newfound confidence and Daniel's genuine support, eventually left her position as a maid, not out of shame but empowerment. She enrolled in business courses, determined to build a life that honored her mother's memory rather than one shaped by the injustice done to her. Daniel remained a steady presence throughout her journey, not out of obligation, but because somewhere between that chaotic night at the gala and the months of healing that followed, genuine respect had quietly grown into something neither of them expected, but both were grateful for. Months later, at a small gathering to celebrate the official launch of the Diane Bell Scholarship Fund, Amara stood in a room far smaller and far warmer than the grand ballroom where her life had changed forever. She looked around at the faces of young women who would benefit from opportunities her own mother never had, and for the first time in years, she felt something close to peace. "My mother used to tell me that we may not have much, but we would never be small," Amara said during her speech, her voice steady and strong. Tonight I finally understand what she meant. Because being small was never about what we had. It was about what we allowed people to make us believe about our worth. Tonight, I stand here not as someone's maid, not as someone's charity case, but as my mother's daughter, proud, whole, and finally free. The room broke into warm applause, many wiping away tears of their own. Sometimes the people we overlook the most are the ones carrying the greatest strength. Sometimes the truth takes years to surface, but when it finally does, it has the power to heal wounds we didn't even know were still open. And sometimes one moment, one single unexpected moment really can change everything. If this story moved you tonight, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that dignity and truth always find their way to the light, no matter how long it takes. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.